Good morning. Today is either Tuesday or Wednesday, May the 5th, May the 4th or May the 5th. May the 4th be with you if it is Tuesday. Yes, so let's talk about this thing called the Northern Renaissance today, shifting gears. Yes, pretty cool, huh? So, we are here. As it says, the rise of Northern Europe. This is also called the Northern Renaissance or the Humanist movement. Northern and Western Europe became consumed not only in the affairs of the Protestant Reformation, but also the new discoveries of Christopher Columbus and the New World and the massive profits offered across the Atlantic. Spain at the time was ruled by the Habsburg dynasty, whose German cousins also ruled Austria and would rule Austria until World War One. England was ruled by the Tudors, Henry VII, Henry VIII, Mary I, and Elizabeth, with Northern Europe discovering new routes to lay hands on the coveted spice as well as other profit making goodies. The cities of Venice and Genoa began to lose money, while the status of Spain, England, and the Netherlands began to cash in. And with money comes art. We know that. Money, profit, art. They go hand in hand. Spain, for example, was able to ship gold and to a greater extent silver from Central and South America to Europe literally by the boatload. Uh, yeah, what does that have to do with cobblestone streets? Well, you see, throughout the colonial period in the Americas, one of the tricks they learned to increase their profit margin, those ships they used, the galleons, very tall ships, set up very high in the water, sails set up high in the water. And I don't know if you ever played with a sailboat when you were a kid. Good puff of wind comes and blows on your little sailboat. It does this. And what you need is ballast. In other words, weight to keep the ship setting upright in the water so that it doesn't fall over. And what they would use for this ballast was rocks. They would get lots and lots of rocks and just fill the bottom of the boat with rocks. That way, the boat stays upright. Now, when they got to the Americas, there was so much stuff to be shipped back that in order to increase their payload, they would take the rocks out of the bottom of the ship and then just toss them off on the shore. And then they would load the bottom of the ship with whatever it is they were carrying. And so somebody got the bright idea, sitting there looking at that giant pile of rocks, said, our streets are made of mud. Why don't we use those rocks? And they took the rocks, laid them side by side in the street, added a little coating of concrete, mortar, or whatever they used, and there you have good streets that didn't turn to mud every time it rained. Midwife. Midwife is a woman who helps another woman have a child. Wet nurse. We've went over this before. Um, Michelangelo had a wet nurse, a woman who breastfed him until he no longer needed it anymore, and she sold her services. All right. So it is interesting to note that with all this extra wealth, the Northern European courts produced little original art and had to import artists from the ranks of the Italian and the German masters. King Francis I, imported Leonardo da Vinci from Italy and gave him shelter until his death. He was running from the law. Henry VIII utilized Hans Holbein. In Northern Europe, the artists of the Northern Renaissance became less preoccupied with purely religious themes and became more and more involved in humanism and used art to reflect the position of man on earth. Notice that Northern painters preferred oil paint on wood, as well as the oil paint on canvas, to frescoes. And there's a very simple reason for this. The climate in Northern Europe the climate in Northern Europe is rather damp. And frescoes don't do well in damp climates. And so they went with oil on wood panel, like the ones at the back of my room. That's acrylic paint on wood panel, but that's a wood panel. Neither one of those. Now, the one of Van Gogh's Starry Night that you're looking at right up there, that is canvas. Somebody stretched, one of my good, Miss Kinster stretched a nice coat of canvas over a wood frame and then made a beautiful painting. Yes. So, yes. Artworks were often found inside the doors of altarpieces. Altarpieces. Let me pull up an altarpiece. Forgive me. And we're back. We were talking about altarpieces, weren't we? What is an altarpiece? This is an altarpiece found at the University of Cincinnati. It occupies the front and center of the altar of the church. And what it is, it's a place where they stored the sacraments, stored the communion wine and the host. And they also then, if you notice, if you fold these two panels up here, it fits nicely in there and protects the painting. And they only kept it open during the service. This is called an altarpiece. Oil paintings on wood panel decorated the altarpiece. Of course, the most famous one is the Ghent altarpiece, and I don't think I have that one. Do I? Pretty sure I don't. I do not. Okay. Back to the matter at hand. So, Jan van Eyck's greatest altarpiece was the Ghent altarpiece. Note the example on page 232 by Jan van Eyck, the marriage of Giovanni Arnolfini and Gianni Sanami. Well, maybe I have one without you having to look. That is the painting that disappeared. Now, this painting is kind of cool. Look at this. Look at this. Look at this. Zoom, please. It's only, the painting is like about 29 inches in diameter. But look here. See, that's the little convex mirror in the back. And look at it, and you can see the painter and some other good guy. But yeah, the painter puts himself in the art. Is that not the coolest thing in the world? I think it is. So, yeah. What is symbolized by the following? Well, let's go the dog and, yeah, single candle. Let's go back. Yeah, pull it back down. The dog, which is right here. The single candle in the window. The single candle represents, that's the candle of Christ, represents the light of Christ. The dogs are a traditional artistic symbol of fidelity. What is fidelity? Oh, it's a place where you invest your money. No, fidelity means faithfulness in marriage. Yeah. So, back to the matter at hand. The first genuinely humanist painter of the Northern Renaissance was Albert Dürer. Albert Dürer did a series of self-portraits, oil on wood panel. The Knight, Death, and Devil. We're going to look at these as we have in our class because nobody else is watching, so we'll look at them. Peter Bruegel the Elder further immersed himself into humanism. Notice the painting on 230. Yes, let me show you. Peter Bruegel. I know which painting that is. Give me a second. This is The Hunter's Return by Peter Bruegel the Elder. I mean, the painting is as plain as can be. It's about hunters coming from home on the hunt with nothing into a snowy village. The Hunter's Return. This is what is called a genre, Genre, painting. It basically shows human beings engaged in normal activities that human beings would do. Yeah, and that's all. As opposed to lofty things like what gods are doing or kings are doing or the forces of God. This is just everyday people doing everyday things. Okay. Northern humanists were often called Christian humanists, which distinguished them from the classical humanists of Italy. One such humanist was Desiderius Erasmus. His best work was called In Praise of Folly, which was a work of satire that criticized society through humorous exaggeration and parody. Erasmus pointed his finger mainly at the vanity of sinfulness he felt existed in the Renaissance as it had forgotten an emphasis on Christianity. Erasmus also wrote a Greek translation of the Bible with his own commentary, which dared to show the errors made in the Latin version of the Bible, which had been the standard Christian church version, the Catholic Church version, for over 1,000 years. Another great Christian humanist was our friend Thomas More. More, who was a friend of Erasmus, they called themselves the Oxford Reformers, wrote a satire of his own called Utopia. Now, Utopia, and if you remember the word utopia, the word was first used in Plato's Republic. It created a land called Utopia. It meant in Plato's Republic, it meant no place. Here it means the perfect place. Utopia was a fictional island where the inhabitants had solved the problems of war, poverty, and crime. It was written in Latin. Everyone wore the same wool clothing. Everyone went to bed at 8 o'clock at night. Evening lectures were about education and self-improvement. Illicit sex and criminal activity were harshly punished. Utopians did not need money because all material needs were satisfied with just a few hours' labor. As we already know, our good friend Thomas More was beheaded as a result of his moral conscience by his childhood friend Henry VIII. Miguel de Montaigne wrote an intensive introspection. It basically means he talked about his own self and feelings, and he invented the essay, To Whom You Can Write for $20. That's a joke from South Park. I'll explain it tomorrow. So, let us talk about Elizabeth, and more importantly, the Elizabethan age. Now, Elizabeth, as you know, had barely survived her childhood as she had to dodge her somewhat crazy half-sister, who was intent upon restoring England to Catholicism. Numerous suitors, and we'll take a look at Elizabeth's life, when we get to this part. Numerous suitors, as well as plots against her life, one of which may or may not have originated with her own first cousin, Mary, Queen of Scots. When Elizabeth was a young lady, England was ruled for a time by the man who executed her mother, Anne Boleyn. Henry VIII, yes. Then she had to live through the rule of Mary I, the daughter of Catherine of Aragon, who executed so many Anglicans she became known as, wait for it, Bloody Mary. Elizabeth was an Anglican. She somehow avoided execution from her sister. Mary died, and suddenly Elizabeth, this Protestant, was a queen in a land that may or may not have desired a queen. She was received warmly at first and made an art out of dodging both assassins and marital suitors. She became a person, however, who put political ends ahead of religious convictions. Historians call this type of leader a politic. Yes, it is a good word. While most art in England lagged behind its continental counterparts, theater. The Renaissance in England was theater, Shakespeare. You can't say theater in England, of course, without mentioning Shakespeare, the greatest Western playwright of them all. Without going into too much detail, Shakespeare wrote 3 categories. Sonnets, which were 14-line poems. I don't know how I made that mistake. Then there were tragic plays, such as Hamlet, where a young man is convinced that his uncle murdered his father so he could marry their mother, and ends up killing himself. Hamlet, Julius Caesar, Othello, Macbeth, and I was Macbeth once, and King Lear. Comedies such as A Midsummer Night's Dream, Much Ado About Nothing, sort of like Seinfeld. These plays were done by a troupe of male actors because women, were not allowed. And also, much of the subject matter was often, Shakespeare's called the bawdy bard, because a lot of the stuff he talks about is actually pretty sexual. But once again, I'm sure you all know this, many modernisms, such as I Smell a Rat, Something is Rotten in the State of Denmark, Between a Rock and a Hard Place, were inventions of Shakespearean plays. Meanwhile, back in Italy, the birthplace of the Renaissance, the effects of the Reformation had taken its toll on the Roman Catholic Church. And one of the things that had resulted in this upheaval was the Catholic Church looking at itself and making certain changes to right the obvious abuses of church policy. This was called the Catholic Reformation or the Counter Reformation. Now, one of the things that the Counter Reformation does, the Catholic Church decided that, if the Protestants are going to go plain, we're going to do exactly the opposite. We're going to go real fancy. The Protestants have criticized our churches for being too decorated. We're going to mega decorate them. And of course, that means art. On the other hand, music became more conservative in its nature, particularly Protestant music. On the other hand, Italian theater was forerunning influence to William Shakespeare. So, the classical models of Plautus and Terence. Plautus and Terence. Plautus and Philip. No, I'm sorry. Terence and Philip. Forgive me. Terence and Philip. Yes, from South Park. Some plays were commedia, commedia dell'arte, improvisational comedy. Improv. You think that, here's the first place to come up with improv. Not only did this art form allow the barest plot lines, but for the first time actually allowed female acting participation. Grave, which means serious improvisation. Yes. As Renaissance lurched toward its end, in Italy, some of the artists began to add the human element to the Christian and classical themes. We'll take a minute to look at these. The Tempest by Giorgione, The Marriage of Cana, and Titian's Bacchus and Ariadne. And I think we need to have a test. Let's aim for Friday, shall we? No, let's aim for Thursday. We'll have a test Thursday, May the 6th. Yes. And with that, we'll stop.